This is the Concord FinCom committee meeting. I'm Chris Reynolds, I'm the chair, and so I'm going to open up the meeting with a roll call. So I'm Chris Reynolds and I'm here. Ray Andrews.
He's here too.
Okay. Dee Ortner.
Present.
Eric Dahlberg.
Present.
Mary Hartman.
Here.
Kathy Kukalo.
Here.
Amrith Kumar.
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes. John Hickling.
Present.
Dean Banfield.
Present.
Greg Gorello.
Present.
And Peggy Briggs.
I'm present.
Thank you. Okay, great. So we have an agenda tonight, which you've seen. And what we're going to do, so just to remind folks where we are. So this is a capital planning discussion this evening. So the new process that was put into place and started in September. So there's a series of 3 meetings. The first meeting occurred between the select board and the school committee back in September. This is the second meeting that the FinCom will review this new plan, this 10-year capital plan. And then there's a third meeting again with the select board and the school committee where they finalize the plan. So that's the purpose of this meeting. It's also another opportunity for public comment. So what we're going to do tonight is look at that plan. We're also going to review its impact on the tax bill. So what does the spending and the related debt do to the tax bill? And we're going to look at some ideas if we're interested in reducing the impact of that tax bill. And in particular, there we'll be talking about the middle school. So the middle school and any potential recommendations to how to absorb that debt. And then we will open it up to public comment. So that's how tonight's going to go. You received the deck in advance that Kerry prepared. So she's going to walk us through that, but that's how we're going to move through the evening. And at the end, my goal is that to the extent that we have them, if there are recommendations we would make about the plan or the debt, that we would have agreement on those and that I would draft some sort of a letter to the town and the select board to say this is what FinCom's reaction was to the plan so that they have that in advance of that third meeting. That makes sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what we're off to go do. So I'm going to turn it off over to Kerry and take us through that document.
You and good evening. The superintendent and town manager and representative from the Board of Selectmen and school committee are in the audience. I don't know if you'd like to have them come into the meeting.
I was not going to promote panelists because this is really a FinCom meeting, Carrie. So if folks want to become panelists, I can put some folks up, but only a few.
Okay.
So I think I'm okay leaving it this way.
All right. So let's get started then. I thought it might be helpful to members of the committee just to take a quick look at what our capital planning process in town was before the capital planning task force and what has changed as a result of the capital planning task force. And so on the left-hand side of the screen is before the task force, on the right is after. And I think the best thing that, or one of the best things that came out of the task force is we're now talking about 3 types of projects as tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, which is so much easier than the terms that we were using before. So our tier 1 projects, which we had been calling capital outlay, are typically projects or purchases that are up to $100,000, are funded through cash, referred to as capital outlay, and they're part of the town manager's fiscal year plan. Again, before the task force, the second category we referred to as the debt plan, and this was anything that was typically between $100,000 but under $2 million. And we were really looking at single year purchases, not not phases of multi-year projects. So between 100 and 2 million. This was also part of the town manager's fiscal year plan, but these items were funded through the issuance of debt. And then the third category, previously just referred to as very large projects, we would consider this anything over $2 million in a single year. And these would typically show up in standalone or separate warrant articles at town meeting. And they were generally funded through the issuance of excluded debt, though not 100% of the time. But there really was no uniform process to advance these projects. So these were more opportunistic, particularly with the smaller projects, and they were often related to land purchases. And they would just sort of come up, at annual town meetings. Sometimes we'd have a special town meeting for these projects, but not really a standard process that we were going through. So then, as a result of the capital planning task force, again, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, really no changes to tier 1. The one change to tier 2 really is moving from a $2 million maximum up to a $5 million maximum. And looking at that either single year or multi-year. So we have a number of projects over the last couple of years, particularly park development projects where we've had phases in each year. So we want to look at the project as a whole, whether it will be funded in one year or multi-year. And so that's really the difference there. And then the tier 3 is what we're focusing on. So tier 3 is over $5 million, whether it's a single year or multi-year. But we will now have a uniform process.
So Carrie, I'm sorry, can you stay on that page for a second? This is the item I sent you a question about. So I understand how the process for the capital planning was divided into these 3 components, including the focus really on the over 5 million. I don't understand, or I didn't understand that somehow that would mean that from a budgeting perspective, we would have a shift in tier 2 from 100,000 to 5 million. So in other words, it seems like what we tried to come up with for a planning process has changed the way we're going to budget for projects. Is that correct?
Well, so there's definitely a difference in the threshold, and it is obviously very significant. Our debt plan, or our tier 2 plan, on an annual basis is between $4.5 and $6 million. So it is going to be very difficult and really impossible to have $5 million projects on an annual basis, given the constraints on the dollar amount, and our existing policies related to debt talk about no more than 5% of debt per year for capital. So I think we're going to have to do some work on that tier 2.
Okay.
But that really wasn't the focus of the capital planning task force.
No, it wasn't. And if that was an unintended consequence, I don't know. I think you might want to go back and look at that, because I don't think that was the intention, was to somehow limit tier 2 spending. Anyway, so we don't need to solve that one this evening, but that's sort of an interesting, looks like fallout from that.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What was the rationale for that change? Because other than that one change, it seems like we've got new labels. 100K became 100K, 2 million became 5 million. And we got new labels from capital outlay, debt plan, very large projects at tier 1, 2, 3. What was the rationale for the change?
So I can tell you there was a lot of discussion at the task force level about the minimum threshold for 3. And there were some members who thought it should be 10 million. And I don't think, nobody was looking at it that anything under that tier 3 threshold, we weren't really talking about the impact. I certainly mentioned the impact to tier 2 and to our current process. The impetus or what we were getting at was these very large projects. And what's the definition of a very large project? And again, some people thought 10 million was really the minimum for a very large project. But the majority felt that it was 5 million. And that at 5 million, it needs to go through this additional review process that has a lot more public opportunities for public to participate.
Does that effectively mean that as a result of projects which in the old mechanism would need to go to a standalone warrant article now effectively get made part of the town manager's FY plan? Maybe not 5 million, maybe not the entire 5 million, but a $3 million project could now be taken away from the town meeting and instead made part of the town manager's FY plan? Is that the intention here? Or is that what is going to happen if this moves forward?
So it's just really a different process. The town manager's plan is also that goes through a public process as well. But the process is different than for these very large projects.
And Amrit, that process also shows line items. It shows all the detail. So I don't think something will get buried there. And this is not something, so this was enacted. So the select board, this says recommendation on the page, it was accepted. So we're here, this is happening. So I don't think it was the intention to, as I say, I think this might be an unintended consequence and perhaps more work, perhaps people need to take a look at it, but the real focus was on creating a process around the projects over 5 million and having coordination between the schools and the towns, having an integrated plan. That was the real purpose, I guess, of that work, if you will.
So my apologies. I thought it was a recommendation and therefore it was looking for our input. But if this is a fait accompli, then
yeah,
we say thank you. Okay.
Well, I think
Okay.
we should say thank you for one thing, which is that the very large projects, even if they were at the $2 million level before, are now in a much more controlled state. These things used to just be, they used to burst forth, from different silos and then get proponents and get on the warrant. You'd have a discussion about them. And now you have a much more coordinated way of getting something like that to come forward to town meeting. Regarding your comment, Amrit, about them being kind of buried, so to speak, in the town manager's budget, we do vote on the debt plan, and it does have, as Chris pointed out, it does have individual line items which can be modified, struck, or whatever during the town meeting. So there is an opportunity. It's just that they're part of a slate that just shows up as one warrant article. So they do have, they're kind of melded in there, but they can absolutely be modified on a line item basis during town meeting discussion. So they're still there, just less likely because of their grouping that there will be a lot of separate discussion on any given one.
Okay, keep going, Carrie.
I see Peggy has her hand
Oh,
up.
I'm sorry. Yes, Peggy.
Yes, my apologies. Dean just made the implication that because of this new capital planning task force procedure, that standalone capital warrant articles wouldn't just, quote, pop up like they've done in the past. I don't see that in this slide, but maybe there's some other limitation on that elsewhere.
It's not on the slide. So I think it's a function of the planning that goes on through this process. One would hope things don't pop on. It doesn't prevent it. It doesn't do anything to prevent that from happening.
just a question about what the uniform process would be. And are we going to be better served if the uniform process were used for a, say, $4 million project, or will it not be an option? Because I understand it's going to be a line item on the town manager's FY plan, but if the town manager's FY plan is a large number of $1 million and you have one line item which is $4 million, to Dean's point, the odds that it's going to get a lot of scrutiny is dramatically lower than if it was a standalone warrant article under
It
very
is-
large projects.
It is a standalone warrant article, Amrit. The debt plan is a standalone warrant article that has all the detail behind that.
But yeah, it has individual.
It's not
line
buried,
items.
it's not buried in the overall town manager's budget. So it's a standalone warrant article.
But
Every year.
not for the one item, Mary. It's a standalone warrant article with multiple line items,
That's
which
right.
could be $1 million here, $1 million there, that kind of thing. You know?
Right, but
Yeah.
it's, right.
Okay,
So the process associated with the tier 3 projects is shown on this slide. The results of the capital planning task force were a recommendation that a 10-year plan, capital plan, including both town and school projects, be prepared on an annual basis, that there be integrated decision-making between the town and the school in preparing this 10-year plan, that we use a set of standard evaluation criteria to review each of the projects in coming up with the priority order, that we prepare a debt template which summarizes the sequencing and estimated impact of each of the projects that is being recommended in the 10-year plan, and that we also prepare an interactive tax impact calculator for residents. So residents can go in and, using their own home's assessed valuation, they can come up with a closer estimate of what the cost of any of these projects is. And then also coming out of the recommendation was an opportunity for citizen comment on the plan. And the chair mentioned that at the beginning of the meeting. There are 3 different opportunities for the public to be made aware of the 10-year plan and to be able to comment. So the first is in September. And in September, it begins with a joint meeting between the select board and the school committee, where the draft plan is presented. And there is an official 45-day public comment period. So this is the first year that we're going through this new process. We did have the meeting in September. Some members of the public were there, and the draft plan was presented, and we did not receive any written comment within the 45-day public comment period. The second step is the meeting we're having this evening. This is the Finance Committee Forum on Capital Planning. If there were any revisions to the plan based on either the joint meeting or public comment, those would be presented in an updated plan this evening, and then we would update the estimated impact. And really the discussion at the Finance Committee level is about smoothing the impact of the debt, and we'll get into that later in the meeting. And then the third and final meeting is another joint meeting of the select board and the school committee, where the final plan is presented. And with the thought being that any projects in the first year would then be placed on the annual town meeting warrant.
so Carrie, just one question, I just confirming it, I think, since I observed that first meeting. There were no changes proposed or made to the schedule at that first meeting, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
So there are 5 projects that are showing in 10-year, oh, there's a hand raised.
Yep, Ray?
Yeah, just it seems that the school committee meets with the select board. Is there any corresponding meeting between the town and the select board, or is that handled differently?
It's the procedure that they agreed to, Ray, so it's right there. Those are the meetings that were agreed to. There is no
Okay.
special meeting with the town, no.
Okay,
Certainly, I mean, the town would be involved in all the discussions, right? So the town has to provide information, but the process is as you see it.
okay, thank you.
I have a question. Carrie, you bring up a good point that one of the outcomes of this process was to get more public input. And I'm wondering, was any thought given, or what was the thought given to adding enterprise fund capital plan to this process? Was that discussed at the capital planning task force, and what was your thinking?
It certainly was discussed, but the emphasis was on the tax impact and understanding the tax impact of the projects. And so the enterprise fund projects are funded through user fees. And so they are not part of this process, although we do show in the capital plan, in the town's capital plan, we do show the enterprise fund projects.
Is that a big portion of our borrowing, and what we borrow for the enterprise funds? Overall borrowing?
It hasn't been to date, but it certainly will be when the treatment plant when that project is started. And that is, that project is getting teed up. So that will be a large portion of borrowing. But right now we're hoping that most of that, if not all of it, will be borrowed through the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust.
Uh-huh.
And there's an opportunity for low interest loans, no interest loans, and principal forgiveness, depending on what we qualify for.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So these are the 5 projects that are currently included in the 10-year period fiscal 23 to 32. These are the same 5 projects that were presented at the meeting in September. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is not necessarily to go through these projects in detail, but just so you understand what the projects are and the magnitude. These are in priority order. The last 2 projects, I have a note, they're not currently within the fiscal 23 to 32 period. And maybe that seems strange because that's what we're supposed to be talking about. I think absent the middle school project, these are the 4 projects that the town would be proposing in the next 10 years. So we did include them, but we certainly understand that because of the middle school project, which is the highest priority, we understand these projects are not going to be moving at the same pace that they would absent the middle school project. And I can tell you, even the 4 projects that are identified are projects that came out of the needs study that the town completed a couple of years ago. And the dollar amounts really are probably not representative of the actual cost of the projects. So these are placeholder amounts. They were the best estimates when that needs assessment was prepared 2 to 3 years ago now. And so I think it's more important to understand the public safety complex. This would be a new standalone facility as opposed to the 5th priority, which is renovations to the existing public safety complex. The 2 DPW projects, there's also a need for a DPW, a new DPW, CPW facility. But understanding that the cost of that is not something that could be managed within the next 10 years. There are likely some smaller projects that could be done to extend the life of the existing facility and site.
Mary?
Chris, I have a question. Carrie, the public safety complex, does that 20 million include the purchase of land? Or are we assuming we have land available already?
You know, that is a placeholder to give you an idea of the magnitude. And I think whether or not that includes, it doesn't necessarily, it's just not that detailed, I guess is what I'm saying. It's just to show that it is a substantial, that project has a substantial price tag.
Ray, do you have a question? Or is your hand still up from earlier? Oh, looks like you're all set.
No,
Lois?
no, I don't have a question.
Okay,
Answered my
great. Lois?
Yeah, just a quick question. I don't understand the relationship between priority 2 and priority 5. If priority 5 has to do with renovating the existing complex, wouldn't that be superseded if we rebuild a new complex?
No, I'm not sure if you'd like the town manager to jump on and answer.
Sure.
I'm just confused by it. I don't want to take us down a tangent.
So they are two different projects. Both are needed. And I think if you want to get into that level of detail, this is outside of my scope, and I think he would be the better person to answer any detail.
I don't think we need to take the time with it now. We're not. I think this is more than adequate for present purposes, Carrie. So we'll just put a pin in it.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
And so this here is the model that the Capital Planning Task Force developed to show the estimated impact of these projects and the sequencing. This here shows the tax impact, the annual tax impact. The top shows all existing exempt debt, what the impact is to the median household. And then the first priority, the middle school, assuming the project is $100 million. This is how we laid out the sequencing of debt issuance, that in the first year, we would issue short-term debt in the amount of 35 million. In the second year, short-term debt in the amount of 70 million. And then the third year, either we're showing short-term debt and then permanently financing it in year 4. This is just one of a number of scenarios to fund this particular project.
So Carrie, can you just explain the assumptions under that? So the assumptions, so you can see in FY26, when the project comes on, the short-term financing is converted into bonds, and that impact to the median tax bill is 1,024. So you see that line there, year 4, where we're bonding, but the assumption at 1,000 is what interest rate and what term, Carrie?
So the 1,024 is the 20-year.
25-year.
I think it's actually 20, but it says that 25 on the chart.
So this is based on how the town of Concord, following the same financing model that the town has used for all of its elementary school projects. And so that obviously is a big point of discussion, and we'll talk about that a little bit
Okay,
later.
but just tell the committee then what that is, right? What is the term?
So it's 20 years.
And what
Mislabeled
interest
then.
rate are you assuming? Yeah, it's mislabeled on the chart. That's okay. What interest rate are you using?
That is the 4% rate.
Right, okay. So it's at a conservative interest rate at a conservative term, if you will. It's our traditional term, which is 20 years.
Oh, okay, sorry, I see the mislabel. I apologize.
Yeah, it says the wrong thing on the chart, but that's okay. Okay, so that's what the 1,000 is. The other, so if we just focus on that piece, right, that's obviously if you look at where we are in 23 from the existing debt, the component of it that's in your median tax bill, it's about $800. And if you'd be more than doubling it essentially with 1,000 for the middle school. So it has a very large impact on the debt component of our median tax bill. However, at the same time that debt would be coming up, there's other debt from the elementary schools that goes down. So if you look at the bottom of the schedule, you'll see 981, 1,040, 1,241. You can see that the net impact of the middle school is not 1,024 in this chart. It's in the worst years, which look like they are 26, 27, and 28. It goes from 800 today up to 1,630, 1,514, 1,473. So you're up $800, $700, $600 on the median tax bill for debt as it's projected on this schedule in that 3-year period. So that 3-year period is the very peak, 26, 27, 28. It's not that much lower in 29, but it starts to come down. Everybody see what I'm pointing at there? That's the thing you need to focus on. That is, in my opinion, the problem area, right? So it's a problem for the pop that it gives to the tax bill, which is $600, $700, $800. And it's problematic in terms of the overall capacity, right? So if you're jammed in those years just with the middle school, you can see we also Kerry loaded in here for just, I think for illustrative purposes, what would happen if we loaded in some debt for the salt shed, which I think was priority 3. And I'm sorry, the public safety is also in there coming in 30. We don't have a lot of room for other things, right? So that's the other, I think the other conclusion or observation that I draw from this pro forma chart. Kerry, do you have anything else to say on that?
I think the only other thing I would say is we do show the public safety complex as being the second highest priority, but because of the magnitude of that, there's a potential that the priority 3 might advance before that and hold off on the second highest priority until we get further out into this 10-year period where there may be more of an appetite to advance a project of that size.
Okay, now we can maybe have some questions. So I see, Greg, you have your hand up?
Yeah, Christine, you just said we don't have room. Are we actually hitting a boundary of like debt service, or just
Nope.
what
I'm just- yeah.
end person is going to pay?
Yeah, what the taxpayer is going to pay. That's all I'm looking at.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a bet, like we're actually like
Nope.
hitting some.
No, there are some boundaries. We don't come anywhere near them. They're based on the fair value of the property. So, but we do have some financial policies around debt service, I think, Kerry. I don't know if we hit any of those.
No, we don't have any that are related to exempt debt.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Amrith?
Just to get a clarification on what you're saying. So in 23, the bill is expected to be 981. but by 26 is close to doubling, and then we claim it's going to come down according to this projection. But this is going to depend on a town meeting action in 23 in the amount of the $35 million. It's going to be
Of 100 million.
now in 23. Is it 100 million or is it 35 million?
The town meeting action will be for the full amount and the bonding will occur over multiple years.
Yeah. So you're gonna vote on the price. Yeah.
We're going to vote on the full 100. And
So
then
it will be done in one shot in 23, and the payments will start showing up in tax bills over a course of 3 years, going up from 981 to 1630, and then potentially coming down after that.
Right.
Okay.
Because other debt is dropping, not because the middle school is staying at $1,000, right? But other debt is dropping. If you look at the top
Yeah,
line.
the top section is coming down.
Yeah,
Okay.
right, exactly.
And just as a maybe to make it easier when you're describing this the next time around, if you have a spreadsheet, if you can keep the column and row headers, that would be great. Like A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be easier for you to describe it.
Okay, any other questions or any discussion on this? So any reaction to this? So the FinCom has had a discussion about this for a while. So if you looked at our last 2 or 3 FinCom reports where we do the 5-year projections, and I know last year we included the potential effect of the middle school debt in the projection, and we showed that the effect on the median tax bill was quite significant out in some of these outer years here as the debt comes on board. So this isn't new news from a FinCom perspective. Obviously, we have some new members. So I wanted to make sure that everybody saw this. So again, there's assumptions in this, right? So assumptions can change, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, was to say, if this is the situation, there's only, and if the tax bump is higher than we would like, there's only a couple of choices, right? So you can lower the overall cost of the school, which has been tried now by the middle school building committee for some time, and I don't think that's going to happen. There could be some offsets to it, and so that's still open. Maybe there are some other ways to reduce the cost. You can delay the timing of the project. Again, I don't think that that's likely. So it's going to hit when it's going to hit, most likely the way it shows on the schedule. Or you can think about smoothing the debt hit. And you can do that in, I think, 2 ways. You can change the term of the debt, so you lessen the effect on an annual basis. And you can also build up your stabilization reserves to offset the impact of the debt in the years that it hits. And those are 2 things that I wanted to talk about with the committee. But I'll pause there to see if there's any more questions or comments on that.
What about the options of delaying some of the other projects like the salt shed? Because
Yep,
the salt shed is coming online at the same time when you're going to be picking up your peak debt here. So if you can push that out by 2 years, what is the cost going to be to do that?
You can see it right there. Well, you can see what the impact is. It's not a great impact, but it's not bad. I agree, you could do that.
Sorry, no, but when I said what is the cost, I mean, we're doing it in FY25 because we need it for some reason. What is it going to cost us if we want to delay the project? What is the counterbalancing expense we're going to have in order to, yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Carrie does. I don't know what I have a feeling it's on, again, this is a kind of a pro forma schedule, but it was on there because if you waited until 29 or 30 to advance anything, you wouldn't get much else done. So I think because it's a smaller project is why it was pushed forward. I don't know if there's any necessary timing on it. We can certainly, you want to promote Stephen, Chris Carmody, and so we can ask him if there's a timing issue that we're missing here. Stephen Crane.
Yep. He's joining.
Great, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Stephen, how are you?
I just want to make sure. Yeah, it's, I want to make sure I understand the timing question.
Yeah, so the way the schedule works, the salt shed is coming online, looks like in FY '25. So Amrit's question was, is there a reason why we couldn't delay that to avoid adding some debt in years that were already peak years?
I'm not that proficient with the physical condition of the salt shed, but I haven't heard that it's critical. So as we sit here now, I don't think I can say, yes, there's a reason. There's probably not a reason why it couldn't be pushed out. And I know this was rough. I did hear like the other questions about some of the projects. They really are needs that were identified in our facility study, and they are kind of placeholders. We know we have them coming up, but we knew that there was going to be some lag till we got to them because of the middle school. So that was kind of our operating assumption.
Well, I guess the question, maybe I'll ask it differently. So we're just looking at the big peak, right, that hits in 26, 27, and 28 on this schedule, Stephen. So if it was possible to push back the salt shed further, it would help lower that peak. It doesn't make, that's the only point we would make, is if it's possible.
Yeah, we understand that. And like I said, I think we all have a commitment to try and, minimize, shocks to the debt service payments beyond that one. The middle school is number one. We understand that. And we notwithstanding a critical failure that is unplanned, I think we understand that the timing of things based on the timing of the middle school permanent financing.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Peggy?
I just gonna question the 4% assumption.
Yeah.
That obviously has a huge impact. And I don't know what our most recent bonds have gone out at.
So our most recent bonds are less than 2%. And what I would tell you about the 4% is that is the recommendation of our financial advisor. We have, sort of absent any hard timetable, we use 4%. So obviously, even using 3%, which I think is perfectly reasonable now as we're approaching the approval of the project, is a much more reasonable assumption. And when we look at the results of the brainstorming exercise, we can see what the impact of just reducing to 3%. And it's likely that some portion of that project, if it's financed in the next couple of years, will do better than 3%.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I'm sorry. So what was that dollar amount? The 4 to 3? I know on Willard,
I don't think we have the dollar amount. So she's just saying that that's something that we can look at, right? And we will look at, but I don't think she's calculated the dollar amount.
Okay, so that's you can't just play with that.
Well, it's 1% on 100 million, right? So over some period of time, right? So it's not insubstantial.
When we move to the results of the brainstorming, it does show the reduction to 3% on one of the scenarios.
Right. One of the charts we're going to look at later, Peggy, I think you'll see some of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Farshar.
Hi, sorry I'm late. I just see a little notice saying Carrie started screen sharing, but is there anything on the screen that we should be looking at? Or is this just my problem on my computer?
Yeah, no, we can see the schedule that's up. It's from the
There's a
deck that we
spreadsheet
sent out.
being presented.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and leave and try to join, so maybe that'll
Okay.
make a difference. Thanks.
Okay. Dean.
Just getting back to the question of whether we could defer the salt shed. If we could push that out by 2 years, we would come to the level set in 26, where we've hit our peak debt, which will then become level. And if we bring on the salt shed in 27, the reduction in the other exempt debt is almost identical to what we would bring on. So we would sort of level out and then continue. So a 2-year reduction, a 2-year push on the salt shed would get you some headroom where you hit the maximum on the school debt, and then you're getting some help from the reductions above. So that might be a place to stick it, is just 2 years. That's just a thought.
Yep. Good idea. Mary?
Hi, Chris, you mentioned two things that we can do, which is one is to look at the term of the bonds and also look at the stabilization fund. I just want to be clear that these numbers do not reflect our existing $2 million stabilization fund. That's correct, right?
That is correct. We're
And
gonna look at that. Yes, you're
Okay,
right.
okay. And also it doesn't include any operational savings, the impact of any operational
Correct.
savings.
That's
Okay.
right.
Just-
Right.
just
This is
clarifying.
this is purely what happens, right?
Got it. Thank
We're
you.
gonna start to look at some ways you could reduce it, but that
Thank
just
you.
wanted to make sure people were clear on this is what happens
Okay.
at these assumptions. Okay. All right. Let's keep going, Carrie.
Okay, so back in September, the select board hosted a brainstorming exercise to talk about different assumptions and how they might impact the overall cost or impact to the taxpayer for the middle school project. And some of you, I know were at the meeting, maybe some of you had the opportunity to watch the video of that meeting, but this is the
You want to change the slide, Carrie?
Yeah.
Oh, is it not showing?
Nope.
No, we're still on the proposed tier 3 slide.
All right, hold on. Is it?
It came and went away.
Yeah, okay. Put it up now?
Yes.
No.
Okay. And so as a result of, or the end result of that meeting is that each of these different assumptions were assigned an owner up in this column. And so I've highlighted in the dark blue, the ones that were assigned to the Finance Committee. So the Finance Committee was assigned discussion of the stabilization fund, capturing cost efficiencies from building consolidation. And then there was some additional interest in having the Finance Committee look at the financing assumptions. And then down here also a request to talk a little bit about the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act.
Good.
And so, let's see. This is what I just mentioned. And so the first topic is additional funding for the stabilization fund. So the town has deposited $2 million into the middle school stabilization fund. And there is an interest in growing that fund over the next couple of years to help smooth that peak. And there are 3 different items that I think are potential sources of additional funding to the stabilization fund. And they're listed here: free cash, the overlay surplus, and the last one, override for debt stabilization fund. So at the last 2 meetings, we've actually talked about free cash. And I've let you know that although we don't have free cash certified yet, we are estimating a certification of $8.5 million. If we assume $1 million for property tax reduction in fiscal 23, like we have in the budget currently, that would leave us a balance of $7.5 million in free cash, which represents 6.29% of budget. And the policy minimum is 5%. So there's definitely some opportunity for additional free cash to be placed into the stabilization fund.
So just hold for 1 second, right? So folks see that. So the minimum under the financial policy is just about 6 million, right? 5,963,592. That's the minimum. Right now, assuming town meeting approved the $1 million we used last week when we put it in our guideline estimate, right? We offset the taxes by $1 million in our estimate last week. That leaves you, the 7.5 million. So the minimum is 6 million. we would be at 7.5 million. So the most you could take, and I'm quite sure there'll be other requests on free cash, would be 1.5 million out of free cash. So I just want people to understand what the most is there.
I didn't
be
understand
a-
this slide the last time. There's one line in there that I just need a little explanation for what the surplus amount to be used in accordance with policy. What does
Yeah,
that number represent? I just don't understand that number.
it's a negative number, Dean, and so it's really not, the label doesn't match the words, right? So that's what it is. So it should, this is the amount below the max. So the 11.9, right, is the max. So if you were
Right.
above that, you'd have some number that would be in there. We don't have a surplus. We're
We don't
under.
have, okay, all right.
That's
So
what
it's
that
a
is. Just the
it's a
labels.
negative
The
number.
labels are wrong on the left-hand side. They assume a surplus. There isn't one.
I see. Okay, got it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, keep going.
So the next potential place that we could look for some additional money to put into the middle school stabilization fund is the overlay account. So on an annual basis, the town sets aside funds for the overlay account, and this is an account that is available to the Board of Assessors to fund tax abatements and exemptions. Any amounts that are remaining from that annual set aside stay with the overlay account. So they don't close out to the general fund. They don't become part of free cash. They just stay with the overlay account and they accumulate. At the current time, the balance of the overlay account is $2.9 million. So that's obviously very significant. At any point in time, the Board of Assessors can determine that they have too much in the overlay account and they can vote to release it. And if they vote to release it, it's called overlay surplus, and it's returned or turned over to the purpose or turned over to the town to then be reappropriated. And in the last couple of years, this has actually happened. It happened at our last annual town meeting where the Board of Assessors voted to release $150,000. And that was to fund the senior means tax program. And then back in 2017, they voted to release $1.5 million, and that was voted by town meeting, reappropriated for technology initiatives. So we do have a past practice of asking the Board of Assessors to determine if they have surplus to release for other purposes. So two things that I want to make sure, or I want you to take away from this. We have a significant balance already, $2.9 million. And in the fiscal 23 budget plan, we're assuming that we will add another $500,000. So given the current balance, I don't know, we don't need to do both because 2.9 is already pretty significant. But fiscal 23 is a revaluation year, so we should expect to receive an additional number of abatement applications, not that they will be granted, but there may be an additional need for overlay. And I see just about everybody's hand.
Yes, Dean.
Couple of questions about the functioning of the assessor. Can the assessor grant a retroactive revaluation of an abatement in a retroactive manner, so that so if we give money this year, but it doesn't all get spent and it sits in this account, and somebody comes and says, well, for the last 3 years, I've been overbilled and I really should get an abatement for the last 3 years, that money might be available to pay for something like that. I don't know if the assessors are allowed to do that or if it's just for current year and going forward. So that's my first question. Yeah, go ahead. You're going to answer it.
You do have to file each year And the appeals typically get processed within the same year, but there are occasions where they might carry over for a couple of years. So it is, and then there's an opportunity to go to the appellate tax board, which is a state board to review or to appeal actions of the local board of the local board of assessors. So it's not typical. You can't today file for this year and 2 prior years. You had to have
Okay.
in that year.
But you might have some kind of ongoing effort to get your taxes back that may last some time, and then you have to sort of claw back because you've been trying for a while to get the money. I understand that. So there is some logic behind, once it's been appropriated to this account, it just sits in the account. It doesn't just fall back to free cash like a regular budget line. So the other question I guess I had is, are we compelled to allocate money on any given year? Can we just say this 500K, we're not going to allocate that? We're not going to allocate anything this year because there's a healthy balance. That's something we can do.
Yeah, we actually checked with the Department of Revenue because the question had never come up, and I've never had the occasion to potentially recommend not adding something each year, but the Department of Revenue has said that there is no requirement, as long as you have a sufficient balance, there's no requirement on an annual basis to add to overlay.
Great. And the final question is, does this behave like snowfall? Like some years we have to pay a lot of money to have the roads plowed, and other years it's very lean. We don't really have, there's not that much salt spreading being done, et cetera. So is this the kind of account that varies, greatly over time?
So we revalue properties on every 5 years. And in the reval year, you typically see more requests for abatement. But again, they're not necessarily granted, but you will see more applications, more people looking for abatements. And so this is something going into fiscal 23, we typically would add 500 is what we have been doing in any given year. Going into fiscal 23, the reval year, we may increase it, or we typically would be looking to increase. I wasn't proposing an increase because we already had a healthy balance. And I think in my opinion, we have more than we need. So I don't think that we need to do both of those things. So we could either ask the assessors to release, say, $500,000, or we could just not put that $500,000, set that aside for overlay.
Thank you, Carrie. You've answered my question. Thank you.
Eric?
Yeah, you kind of touched on this with that last question from Dean. Is there any way to predict what is a sufficient amount or a sufficient balance based on performance in previous years?
Well,
I think though that, this is money that's controlled by the Board of Assessors, right? And so if they were asked, it's their question, if you will, more so than it is ours or Carrie's, right? So if we were looking to this reserve to ask for it to be released, it would be up to them to figure out how much they felt that they could release. Is that fair to say, Carrie?
yes.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Eric? So it's not something that we determine, right?
Understood, but I imagine it's a knowable number. We could look back on previous fiscal years and find out what that number is.
Could I make a comment, Chris, having observed the Board of Assessors last year?
Sure.
So I think what Carrie's trying to tell us is that the time that you see the most volume of requests for abatements is when there's a revaluation year. Once the valuation of your home or your property is established, it's pretty much year to year, it's going to be the same. So there's not a lot of volume. The households pretty much stay the same. What I observed was the applications were from where they had to make adjustments had to do with sales and transactions where properties were revalued based on some marketplace activity. So I think they have a pretty good handle on what they're going to expect in any given year.
Yep. So I would expect, Eric, if we were to make this suggestion, they would come back with a rationale as to what they thought they needed based on whatever their history was. I'm just saying, I don't think we have that information ourselves.
And one last thing, I have a question for Carrie. Carrie,
I'm sorry, Kathy, there's some other people ahead of you, so I'm going to come back to you, all right? Brian.
Hey, Carrie. This is piggybacking on the previous questions as well, but I'm curious to know, have we always allocated 500,000 during each revaluation year, or has that number changed over time?
It has changed over time. I would say it maybe used to be closer to 400,000. It hasn't changed significantly. It's not like it 5 years ago it was 150 and now it's $500,000. But the $500,000 is the target that we've used for the last 5 years or so.
And so I guess the underlying question is, there is this, to Chris's point, there's this sort of conversation that's happening between the Board of Assessors and the town to determine what the appropriate appropriation is going to be to the Board of Assessors, because once we release that cash, we don't have control of it anymore. So as we go into this new year, this new revaluation year, 500,000 is the estimate, but that could theoretically change. Is that,
The only purpose of us, just so guys, the only purpose of us talking about this, right, is the fact that there is a $3 million balance that's in a reserve that we could ask to be some portion of it to be released to fund stabilization, right? So that's really the purpose of the discussion. The $500,000, I don't know what the right number is for $500,000. We may be interested in that in our FY23 budget discussion as to whether it's needed or not. But the primary point on the page is the 3 million.
But we don't have to ask for anything if we just don't appropriate the 500. We just use that for stabilization.
That's correct. You
So
could.
we don't have to ask them nicely.
Well, let me ask a question. Carrie, is the 500 in guidelines or out?
It's outside of guidelines.
So it's not even in our world theme.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's in the town manager's budget.
It's in the town manager's budget somewhere, right? But it's outside of guidelines.
Yep, it's outside of guidelines.
Okay. Greg.
Harry, just a quick question. When the 1.5 million was released, do you happen to know the balance at that given time of the account, just to get a likelihood that they would release some?
Yeah, it was, my recollection is it was between $4 and $4.5 million at that.
Thank you.
Parashar.
So what happens if the entire 2.9 million is released? Can the balance go to zero? And what are the consequences of it going to zero?
So it can't go to zero because the minimum amount it could go to is what is outstanding in any year that there's an outstanding application. So
okay,
we would have to at least reserve the total value of what was outstanding.
okay, thank you.
Okay, Kathy. You're on mute, Kathy.
Yeah. So, Carrie, if I understood this correctly, the town cannot just take this 500,000 and say, okay, we're not going to give it to the overlay. We're going to give it to a different account. It has to go to the overlay, and then the assessors need to say, we can release it, or we will release it for this purpose.
Yeah, not on the 500,000. So the 500,000 is what is set aside in fiscal 23 for planning purposes. So it hasn't gone to the Board of Assessors, and the town could, the town manager in his budget could say, you know what, for fiscal 23, we're going to put in 100,000 or set aside 100,000 or 200,000 or even zero based on the balance. So that is
So the town manager could lower the amount, but could he then put that money where we want it, where we can use it?
yes. So we could, for planning, we could say it's zero, but we're going to take that 500,000 and put it to the middle school stabilization fund.
Okay, thank you.
Amrith.
Yeah, just to follow up on question which Parashar asked half of, which was balance can't go to zero. You said that it has to be at least enough to pay for the outstanding claims. How much is that?
I don't have that off the top of my head.
Ballpark kind of number. I'm just wondering, is that a small amount or a large amount? Because it seems like we're trying to use this as a mechanism to offset whatever the increase in the tax bills may be, but we already have a fairly substantial amount. I'm trying to wrap my head around why we would want to do this at this point.
Because you could use it to fund the stabilization reserve, Amrith. So it's tax money that's already been collected, right? So it's collected, it's sitting in a reserve, again, not one that it's controlled by the Board of Assessors. So in the past, they have released it for certain purposes. Should we ask them to release some of it to help fund the stabilization reserve? At the moment, we have 2 million. We'll go through this math in a minute, but I think you'll need to at least double that. That's the purpose. That's why we're talking about it.
Okay, so in that case, I'll wait till we come to it, but I was looking at slide 10, which talks about the 5% minimum and the 10% maximum, which says
That's free cash. That's free cash, right?
Oh, okay, so
that's free cash. That's not this.
Thank you very much. Okay, sorry about that.
No problem. Mary?
I'm thinking that it would be a good recommendation for us to start with the 500K because that's under our control. And then, but that doesn't preclude us from also asking the Board of Assessors to look at the 2.9 and say, what can they do to help us smooth this debt? So I don't think it's an either or, but I would definitely start with the 500K because again, that's under our control. We don't have to wait for the Board of Assessors to decide, but they may come back and later on and release some money to us. For the exercise we're doing tonight, I wouldn't count on them coming back, but I would, put in the 500K.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Parashar.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I have a similar suggestion to Mary, and I think we should definitely ask Stephen and Carrie to take the 500K and not put it into the overlay account, put that in the stabilization fund, and then formally or informally ask the board for an estimate as to how much of the 2.9 can be used.
Yes.
And then I had a follow-up question. I'm assuming, because it certainly sounded like it from fiscal year 2017, the town meeting had to vote on this. So yeah. I'm assuming that even if the Board of Assessors is conservative and says no, the town meeting could always approve a warrant that takes some of that money anyway. Is that true?
It's not available for reappropriation unless the Board of Assessors release it.
Oh, so they have veto power over this. Well, even over town meeting?
Right, so it's already, it's not technically appropriated because this account isn't appropriated, but for all intents and purposes, it's appropriated to the Board of Assessors for the purpose of funding tax abatements. And so they would need to release it, declare it surplus, and then it's available to the town to be reappropriated. It's very much like any other warrant article. Say that the middle school project, it's $100 million. Say the project is completed at $90 million. That $10 million, that authorization stays with that project until whoever was given control of that says this is surplus and releases it. So this is not any different than any other appropriate town meeting appropriation.
Okay, thank you.
Lois? You're on mute.
So Carrie, just so I understand this, well, we're basically, this is kind of like an escrow, right? This is money, tax money that is attributable to these properties where there's an abatement challenge. And this is a way of making sure that if the abatement challenge is successful, if the person looking for the reduction in their assessment prevails, they can make the refund. Is that what this money is?
Yes.
So it's like an escrow fund. So then how much you can dig into it really depends upon how much is needed to cover the claims. So I just wonder, in a reevaluation year where I think we need to approach this with some caution, because the Board of Assessors may have some very legitimate reasons for not wanting to dig deeply into this. But it helps me now to understand what the function is. So thank you, Carrie.
Kathy?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say to Lois, the balance builds up because not all of the abatements are granted. So, I mean, that was my understanding. And I did hear them talking about the surplus and you know, what was in their account and what they would do with it. And that's why they did the 150 last year for the senior means tax. It was a natural for their work. Okay. But they do know that they have this reserve and that it builds up.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Kathy.
Chris, one last question. I'm sorry. So I understand there's a minimum that's required, but what happens if what happens if the money runs out? In other words, they made a mistake in the estimate, or there was more abatement requests than money available. I'm kind of curious, what happens in that case?
So this is the reason that the Board of Assessors wants to have a sizable balance, so that doesn't happen. I honestly would assume it would go back on, it would need to be raised on the following year's tax levy within the levy. I assume that would be the process. I've never seen that.
It would be helpful, I think, just to get an understanding of what would happen, because if we're asking them to do a projection.
Well, but
And
I'm
that's-
sure they'll tell us.
We're not asking them for rejection. We're just asking them based on
Them to
their
look at it,
knowledge.
right? We're not
telling
tell
them
the amount.
I think, if I could comment, I think it's just as it says on the slide, it's just like snow and ice. It would go into an overlay account that would have to be figured out in the following years. Obviously, you know, you have to pay for it in the current year.
Right. Okay. So it's an idea, right? So it's an option that's out there. I like Parashar's suggestion that we, in our own process, suggest that the 500,000 for FY23 not be included this year. And ask them to take a look at the balance to see if they think it could be declared surplus so that we could use some component of it to help fund the stabilization reserve to help take down the tax issue that's going to happen in 26, 27, and 28. Okay. Let's go on, Carrie.
Okay, so the last option, and I have to apologize because I think I was overthinking this one based on past experience, but the last option is you can raise taxes to fund a stabilization fund. So you could, and there is a process, and this process really is designed for communities that are at the levy limit, which is where I was overthinking this because the last time it came up, it was for a community that was at the levy limit. We're not at the levy limit, so it's not an override. It's just an opportunity to, you could ask the community at town meeting, do you want to raise taxes now to put into a stabilization fund? So when I was first thinking about this, at the bottom of the slide, I was just thinking we are now paying off debt associated with school projects. We're seeing a reduction. People are already being taxed at a certain level for these projects that have been previously approved. In fiscal 23, our exempt debt will be reduced by about $350,000. You could say, why don't we essentially recapture that? People are already paying at that level, and that $350,000 could be a source of funds to go into the debt stabilization fund for the middle school. Or it could be any amount, or it could be the $1 million of free cash that we're proposing in 23 to reduce property taxes. Maybe that gets taken off the table and that $1 million of free cash instead goes into the middle school stabilization fund. So that's just another opportunity.
Hey, Chris, just a quick question. I think you threw out a number that I just want to try to understand. This stabilization fund, I think you had mentioned that the reality is we're probably going to need about 4 million in some type of stabilization fund. So we would want to be collecting up to at least 4 million.
No, we have 2 million. We have 2 million.
That's right. We have 2 million. So we need another 2 to make it.
Well, we're going to talk about it. I think you might need 3. I think you need 2 to 3 million more. Depends on how much you want to soften the blow, right? So it depends on how late you want to take it.
Great, thanks.
Yep. Anybody else? Mary?
I like this last slide. And the way I think of this last slide is that when we were talking about our guideline, we made an assumption that at a 2.7% guideline increase, we'd have a 2.5% property tax increase. And we could bring that up to 3. If we can hold the guideline, we could bring the property tax bill up to 3 and use that 0.5% to establish something like this. And that way it talks to what you're talking about at the guideline meeting, Chris. You brought up the idea of kind of smoothing out the property tax so that we kind of build up. And that's how I think that's where this would work.
That's exactly what I was talking about, was to do something like that.
Exactly.
To help start building it up. Because the problem is, if you need a significant amount, we never know what happens with free cash every year. You could have good years, bad years. So it's and if we know we need it, which I think we do, it would be great to start building it, to recommend to the town management and the select board that we start building that now.
Yeah.
Parashar.
So I apologize. I may have missed this, and you may have addressed it at the beginning of the meeting or in past meetings, but can someone help me understand 3 million, 4 million? Like, how do we arrive at that number?
Yeah, okay.
And-
Let's talk about that. So,
Well, how do we
Yeah.
arrive at that number? And also, like, what does that do? Because the
Yeah.
tax increase
Yeah.
is going to start in 1 year, and
yeah,
how much is the
right,
bill going to go up? Because for me, that context
yeah,
would be helpful to know and understand
absolutely.
how
Yep.
much to build up to.
Yep, okay, so Carrie, can we go to some of those charts in the back? We can actually talk about that.
Do
The
you,
one that,
the interactive one?
whatever the one is that actually shows, if you make these assumptions, this is what the debt comes down by. I can look at it.
Slide 14.
I don't have numbers on them, but
Yeah, it's page 14 of the PDF.
So this one, we can actually plug in numbers and you can see.
yeah, I used, I don't know what one I
Can you
have,
make
but
that a
well,
little larger, Carrie, please?
Another one.
yeah, you can use this one too. It's on there. So you want to show the top part. Yeah, there we go. So the question on the debt term, so Parashar, there's kind of two big questions, I think. And so one is, what's the size of the stabilization? And what can you do with debt term if you so desire? So at the top of the chart, there are, you see on the debt term, there's an assumption. So we talked about 1,024 to the tax bill from the $100 million of middle school debt. That assumes a 20-year payback and a 4% coupon. What Kerry has done in this top financing assumption block has said, okay, you see the 1,024 in column G. If you change it to a 3% coupon rate, which is what Peggy's question was, that lowers it by $89. So you go 1,024 minus 89. If you go to a 25-year term at a 4% rate, it changes it by $145. And if you go to a 30-year level, it reduces it by $223 or thereabouts. Back on the earlier charts, we had talked about the bump that you're trying to smooth is $800, $600, $700.
In
So-
what year?
Yeah.
No, no, in what year though? That bump starts in
26,
what year?
27, 28, right? So right now, the debt, the component of the median tax bill that's excluded debt is about $810. In 26, it goes up to over $1,600 in one
Okay, so
year.
starting in 26.
In 26, right? So
Okay.
26, 27, 28 are the tough years, okay, on the
Okay.
debt chart. So if you could build, so you can see, if you went to 30 years, it's a $222 hit. It's about a third of what you need, let's say, if you need $600-700, right? If you had a, so that number there is $1.6 million and it ends up to be 222. So if you had a $5 million stabilization reserve and you took it over 3 years, Parashar, that's about $1.6 million a year. So that would give you another 222. So that
Yeah.
brings you to about 450 down, right? That would be $450 down on a 600 or 700 growth. It takes you about halfway there. You have maybe another $75 related to, if you go down to the cost saving assumptions, the middle school cost savings is $76. That's a bird in the hand, if you will. We think that's really going to happen. So now you're up at around 500. Though, to me, those are the only real three things that we have that we can control the levers on. You can build up a stabilization reserve. You can extend the term of the debt. And obviously you can realize the savings that the consolidated building. There may be other opportunities on this list, but I wanted us to focus on the ones that are sort of controllable, real, and impactful. And to me, those are the three that are there. There's a fourth one, which we'll discuss later, but that there may be something in ARPA. I'm not sure. We're going to talk about that. But the ones that we could recommend that have an impact, I think, are debt term and stabilization reserve. So those are the two I really want to talk about with you guys tonight and see if you're comfortable making any recommendations on those. So I think, let's talk about debt term. So, and let me just finish my comments and I'll open up for questions. So debt term, we normally, I say normally, historically, we've been at 20 years. The high school, they actually went to 25 years. So at the high school, there was an extension of the term. This is the largest single project Concord has ever done, right? There's no state money on this. So the 100 million is all coming out of our pocket. It's a school building that will last longer than 20 years, right? It is a school building that will be there for 30 years, I believe. So I don't think it's unfair to spread the debt over a longer period of time to a larger group of citizens, even though we would incur some additional interest expense for sure. It still has, a good savings amount and allows you to soften the blow in these 3 years when otherwise you'd really be pushing up the tax rate quite a bit. So I will pause there. So let's talk about debt terms.
So Chris, can I just summarize what I think I heard just for my own benefit?
Sure.
So for 3 years, the impact will be about $1,000 extra. The impact will come down slightly because other debt's coming off the table.
Yep,
In essence,
that's
that's what's going on.
That's
Thank you.
right.
Okay,
That's right.
thank you.
Greg.
Yeah, do we have I'll call it a penalty of for going to a 30-year, like how much extra we're paying on top of the 20? Is it $2 million in interest more? What's the amount there? I did not do my calculations previous. I should have. But that would be one thing that'd be interesting to know.
I know, Carrie, if you've done any math on what the 10 years in additional debt costs us.
I do have it. So this is the interest cost on $48 million. Let's just make sure. Yes, that's the interest cost on 20.
I don't know, what are we looking at on the schedule?
Yeah, numbers are so small, I can't.
Yeah, you just tell us the answer.
Interest goes up from 48 to 71.
Right.
Okay,
So $23 million.
okay.
$23 million buys you an extra 10 years. It's
Yep.
ballpark two and a third a year.
Right. And it gives you some capacity. So remember, there's a combined public safety building that wants to come, right? That people are looking for. Are you going to wait 20 years to put that up? Or are you going to try and create some room by spreading out the middle school, right? So that's the other question, right? Thinking about the capacity and when you need other buildings. So this is about, anyway, go ahead, you guys. Let's see, Dean.
So the thing that we really have decided against for reasons that are not obvious, but we have, is using the standard debt schedule that we've used for all other long-term projects like Alcott and all the elementary schools, which is a declining balance model where every year you're paying a fixed amount of principal every year. It means in the early years, you're paying a ton of interest, but every year you're paying less. And that's how we're getting some of this headroom, which would give us room to build a public safety building or something. But if we go with a level debt, then our exempt debt is just going to be flat, and there is going to be no place where we're growing some capacity to take on more things. So having chosen this flat, the flat payment model, we're giving up some capacity in the future to build room to do other things. So we're losing that. That's all. That's my comment. We really didn't evaluate that here because on a flat payment model, you don't see the big ramp up that then starts to go down. And it's probably worse, but I don't know what the number is. That would be nice to just know what it is that we are avoiding, the real peak that you would get with more interest payments up front.
It would be higher in the front. Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
it would.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
would be more painful up in the front, but
Right.
but after you get to the peak, you're now building every year capacity to take on other projects.
Yeah. I don't know, Carrie, Do you have an answer for Dean? Was there a particular reason? Again, probably because it was even worse.
Yeah,
That
it's
we
even
didn't
worse
show
in the
that.
early years. You know, obviously, you're looking
Show it.
near term.
Yeah, near term, right.
You're looking right, you're looking short term. When we're talking about a 30-year piece of debt, maybe we want to look a little bit longer and say, okay, how do we get through this pain? And so that we can afford other things later. Because otherwise we're just going to fix this thing right in there and it doesn't slow down.
No, it doesn't.
It's up
Carrie,
there.
is that something that you looked at?
Yeah, so I don't know if you can see this, but this is showing the 20-year equal.
My nose in here. There it is.
Yeah, okay, so it's $200 more.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you add about $200 to the bill.
Well, $200, but then look what's happening. Every year you're getting another, 100 plus or something in
Yeah.
capacity to
Yeah.
do other things as it goes out.
Well,
No.
again, so you could do that, and maybe that gives us a better answer. I guess the question would be, you'd need more stabilization. Well, I guess the question is, how much do you want to bump the tax bill, right? So I don't know that you're going to be able to get more than 5 million in stabilization. I
So
think
Carrie,
that's
can you just
correct.
show that chart again, just so I see it again? Okay, so we are back to 1024 in like year 7 or something, year 8. You're at 1029. What year is that? 31? I don't know. Year 8, something like that. I don't know. It takes a while to get
Yeah.
to where the level payment would go, and then everything is gravy after that. I don't know.
Well, you're starting at 800, right?
Well, not only that, but it's about $29 less each year. I don't know if that's a big amount, frankly.
Yeah, yeah.
Over 20 years it is what, what Dean is saying, right?
Well, what we're seeing now as Alcott and Willard and those are rolling off is we're seeing 100 plus per year, because that's how I was thinking we could shift the salt shed by just 2 years, and then you all of a sudden have room to do the salt shed. It's just, I don't know. They do appear to be small numbers as you're going out, but you do after a certain number of years, you're beyond the 1,024 that we're going to be at for 20 or whatever the number was. So yeah. Okay. Well, I hear you. In the early years, it's bad. It's worse.
It's bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian.
I just have a real quick question to Carrie. As we think about these long-term projects, the 30-year, proposal or idea that Chris had mentioned resonates, and I'm just curious to know, in our previous debt, in our previous projects, have we ever refinanced or renegotiated debt throughout the course and sort of strategically thought about that? Because that might be something we would be able to do here, or no.
So for the elementary school projects, we have refinanced each of those at least once or twice over the term.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because that's one of the things that I was thinking about. We're really solving for kind of a 3 or 4 year problem. And
Right.
if there was a way to go out with 30-year, and then once we were over the hump,
And then you
and
refinanced
back down to 25,
back down to
20,
20.
that
Right.
would be ideal. I don't know the opportunity for that, but for me, that makes sense. Or even if you couldn't refi, Brian, you could start prepaying, just like a mortgage, right?
Yeah,
Could we
exactly.
prepay so that we could, you would bring you'd bring the interest impact down. It wouldn't be 23 million. It would be a lot less than that, but it would get us over the hump. And this is a question, Carrie, as well, for the financial advisors, right? So I'm not, a muni bond expert or, so this is a good problem to ask them, to say, this is our problem, right? We have a 3-year window where it's very painful. We don't have this other debt coming down for 3 or 4 years. How might we structure this in a way that, would perhaps alleviate the problem without this extension of the term to 30 years? I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm happy to ask him that. The standard call provision in a 20-year bond would be in year 10. And so a call provision any sooner than that would likely result in an interest rate that was higher, but I don't know by how much.
Yep.
So I could ask him to potentially model with a 5-year call. And, we could take a look at that as well.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. Let me go here. Ray.
Yeah, I like Dean's suggestion about a fixed principal payment each year, even though it does, drive the expenses to the early period. And can that be, and what would the calculation be if you offset that with say a 30-year term with, level principal, and then look for, you said refinancing out 10 years.
Okay, Dee?
Yeah, Carrie, can you tell me on the pages that you were showing us before with the numbers and the payments, were you using a 4% or a 3% interest?
So I believe all of these are 4%.
Those are 4%. Do you have any that show a 3%? I think you said earlier that you thought in the next couple of years that a 3% would be a very reasonable amount. So I'm just wondering if you have any of those charts that tell us those numbers.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like I have that in here, but on this line that's highlighted, at 20 years, a 3% would save
Right.
$8 at median.
Okay. And do you, with your advisors, would you also talk with them about the differences just from the standpoint of municipal funding, 25 versus 30 years? Because I don't think we've ever bonded anything for 30 years. And I know that after 10, you'll probably go back, but have you had any experience with the 30-year bonding versus the 25?
I've not been involved in a project that was bonded for 30 years. But that's something, that's the maximum term that is allowed for school projects in Massachusetts. And there for sure are communities that are bonding school projects for 30 years. It's just not something that we've done here. I think somebody said earlier, the high school is at 25 years.
Correct.
All of our elementary schools are at 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
Greg?
Christine, can we switch to doing the stabilization fund? And that might help us answer some of these questions by knowing, oh, we can get a stabilization fund of this, and then it can help offset years, 3, 4, 5 by this,
Yes.
right? We're attacking it from the other way right now.
Right. So, yeah, so I don't know, Carrie, if you have any math on that. Is it in? Yeah, okay. So you see, you had an assumption of what, over 3 years? Yeah, there it is. So if it was 5 million for 3 years, it's $1.6 million or 222. So it's the same size as the 30-year extension. So the impact is also about $222, Greg.
But is 5 million a number that we can actually get and achieve? That's what I meant.
I don't know. Okay, so here's the deal, right? So here we have 2 million now, right? And we're going to budget for 23. You have 23, 24, 25, and then you have a problem, right? So 26, right. 27, 28, you get a big debt hit. So you have 3 years to get to 5 million. So you tell me, you could do $1 million a year. You could take the number, you could ask the Board of Assessors for money. You could increase the tax rate $1 million a year, 23, 24, 25, and build it that way. So there isn't a set answer, but it gets you a pretty good impact. So at 5 million, you get $222 a year off the, you can, in that 3-year period that you'd use it in. So you build it up to 26 and you'd use it in those 3 years.
What I was getting at is, do we want to save 5 million and we're going to ask the taxpayer for this, right? Do we want to firm that up of what we're going to make that number and how we're going to get to that number and then come back to this, right?
Sure, we can. Other people want to do that. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, fine.
I think,
Great.
I think it would be, I think we can probably make a little bit of progress here about how do we get from 2 to 5 million?
Okay.
And then, you know, we'll get some momentum and then we'll come back and
Okay.
see.
I'm all about momentum at 8:40.
I know you are, yes.
Yeah, 8:40 at night. So, okay.
Okay, so how do
All
we
right,
get
so
3 million more? There you go.
Okay, so do people still need their hands up or are we on a new topic? now?
I do have a
Okay,
question.
Dean. Yeah,
One
go
of the
ahead.
comments that was made was, well, what if we just go with the level payment strategy and start to prepay our principal? Is that a thing in municipal bond finance that you can just have a return of principal and the bondholder who's expecting an income stream is just getting his principal back? Is that a thing? Are you allowed to do that with a bond, with a municipal bond? Carrie, you got any answer there?
I made a note to that I have to follow up with our financial advisor because I'm not sure that we can prepay.
Yeah, exactly. I don't
We
think
could,
so.
we could put it into the stabilization fund, and then when we refinanced, we could pay down principal.
Yeah, that's another, yeah, we could just sort of pay ourselves, so to speak, by taking the money and just putting it aside, and waiting for an opportunity to refinance. You're right. Okay, thanks.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So the stabilization reserve. So again, so I was just doing math, right? So it depends upon, so let's start out with how much do you want to lower the tax impact? So if the tax bill is going to go up by net of the other reductions, it's going to go from 800 up to 1,600, right? If it's 800 now, it's going to be 1,600 in 2026. So that bump, how much do you want to take?
So
You want to
Chris,
level it? I'll give you one idea, and this is based off of Parashar, the work that you did for the guidelines. If you took the 810 that's currently in the excluded debt component of the median tax bill, and you CAGR'd it at 3%, the most you get to is something like 900, 950, something like that. So if you, in other words, you have to sort of figure out, what do you think a normal increase in the debt could be? I was just trying to come up with a way to do it. Anyway, it doesn't come anywhere near where we're going to end up, which is 1,600, 1,500, 1,400. It's a lot higher than where you would normally be. So that's the question, is how low do you want it to be? How much of that peak do you want to take off in 26, 27, and 28? And then that will tell you how much of a stabilization reserve you need. So that's kind of the way to do it.
So Chris, I was coming at it from a slightly different perspective. Let me put this on the table.
Yep.
The last couple of years, we've used $1 million in free cash for housing.
For housing?
And I'm assuming
No,
we
it's
have
500.
3 years.
What do you mean for housing?
500.
Affordable housing.
500.
What was it, 500?
Yeah,
Yeah,
500.
per year.
Okay, fair enough. So let's make
Per
it
year.
500.
Yeah,
And I'm assuming we have 2 million in the stabilization fund now. We have to
do,
build up another 3 million over 3 years.
yes,
Right? So we have to find $1 million a year.
yep,
500,000 from the affordable housing. And then we just talked about how the practice has been 500,000 for the overlay account. If we go with an assumption that every year between now and 3 years, we're going to take $1 million, 500 from free cash and 500 from the overlay, not put it into the overlay for the next 3 years. Doesn't that get us to 5 million by the end of the 3 years?
it would. You just need $1 million a year, but you have to be able to do it, right? You have to have the free cash to do it.
You're right, and here's where I'm
You
coming from.
have to have the free cash.
So you almost make it a mandatory requirement when the town is building up the budget. First things first, take $1 million, put it aside, and then everything else you've got left over, you plan accordingly.
Would you be raising the tax rate to do that, or just assuming it comes out of free cash?
I would be assuming it comes out of free cash and you're just building it up that way for the next 3 years.
What if you don't have free cash? What if we don't get it?
There's a trade-off in services. I mean, it's $500,000.
You can't bind future town meetings or future committees.
I'm not buying, I understand that. I understand that, Mary. I'm just saying we establish a principle, at least for 23, with the hope and
Yeah.
expectation that most of us are going to be on for the next few years, and we just carry that forward.
Okay, that's an idea. Greg? With your hand up still?
Yeah, sorry. Going to option, I think Carrie had option number 4, which was as the debt decreases, we just tax again and sort of keep that money around to fund the stabilization fund. To me,
Yes.
that seems kind of weird because we're taking off 1 million for, alleviating property taxes. And then we're sort of tacking back on, some amount of money to put into the stabilization fund.
Yep.
But was the whole purpose of that exactly what you just said, Christine, was you can't assume that 1 million is always going to be there for free cash to potentially put into?
It helps you because it's money that you have, right?
Right.
Or
So-
you could cause to have, right, by not giving it back, by not giving back the deduction in the debt, yeah.
Right. So one way to also smooth out is we could slowly start to increase, so we have a stabilization fund bringing down the tail and we slowly bring up the beginning of it, right? 22 and 23 and 24, right? By that means, right?
We could. Carrie, do you know how much that gets us? So if it's 350 for FY23, how did you add it up for what it is in the next 3 years, 23, 24, 25? I didn't look at the total, what that adds up to.
Yeah, I did not, but in 24, I believe it's close to 500,000.
Okay,
A safe assumption for 25, 500,000 also. So
so you might get $1.5 million out of that over 3 years.
And that's not touching our $1 million that we put away each year to free cash.
Right.
Right.
That's right. That's right. So you get $1.5
That-
million that way. So again, it's half of what we need. If you need 5 million.
Right. And then potentially, no guarantee, but we could use that $1 million that we keep giving to alleviate the tax burden into a stabilization fund as well, right?
If you do, the tax rate goes up. So you're
Right, but it's leveling off it's starting to bring up the beginning and lowering the backside, right? That's what we're trying to
Yes.
achieve, right?
Yes, you could, which is one way to do it, right?
Yeah.
It's a way to sort of start, unfortunately, well, none of what, you're going to bump up the tax rate to create stabilization and you're going to kind of sort of level load it over time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, you could do that. Okay. Looks like Ray.
Yeah, I agree with Greg. Basically, you did say smoothing the tax burden, not taking it away. So if you can raise it earlier, you can reduce the peak.
Yep, that's one way to do it. And that's what Mary was talking about earlier as
Right,
well.
right.
So when we're talking about, the end tax rate, so, and I haven't done the math to see what it gets you if we left it at 3%, even though the guideline would be lower and the gap that we'd be adding would be tagged for stabilization. I don't know how much that gets you, but I think that's worth looking at. Do the math on that and figure out how much it gets you. So between the two, if you kept the debt reduction, hit it into stabilization, and you also started to raise the overall rate a little bit to build stabilization, we might get close to what we need.
Right, by moving some of the money by not taking money out of free cash to lower the tax rate.
Right.
Something
Essentially.
less than $1 million, maybe
Less
nothing,
than-
maybe part of it.
Yeah, you can do it either way you want, right? Yes, essentially that's it. Yep, that's essentially it. Dean.
Simple question, if we were to go with this strategy, which I think is perfectly fine, we smooth the ramp up by increasing taxes in the very early years, and we're just sort of salting that money away. I'm totally fine with that. My question would be, what's our total levy capacity? Is it like 4 million or something? I've forgotten what the number is.
We're above that now. I think we're 5.1 million right now.
5.1.
Yep.
So we have the capacity to raise taxes in the early years at the $3 million level that we're looking for, without really getting into our a true override. We can just do it.
Right, we have the room right now. Yep,
We have the
do.
room to do it.
Yep, we do.
And yeah, I mean that
But
it
just so-
brings the pain earlier, but it smooths it out and it doesn't go quite so high.
It does.
doesn't feel like it's gonna go
Right,
wrong.
it does, but just remember, it gets you, depends on how much you want. So that gets you, let's say, $230 off the hit.
Yeah,
$5 million gets you $230 off the hit in 26, 27, and 28.
It's not enough.
It's not enough. So
enough.
So that's why I put the debt term on the table as well.
yep.
Because it's not enough. I don't think we can raise 10 million in stabilization, which is what
Right.
it's kind of,
Christine, Mary, what do you call as enough then? What's the data behind? Is it just a feeling? Is it? you
No,
wanna
it's not
break
a
down the
feeling, it's
core?
math. No, it's
I
math.
think the question that Chris asked us earlier, which is we're going from 800 to 1600. So how much do we want to shave off that 1600?
Right.
Right now we shaved off what, 230? If we
230.
increase the stabilization fund from 2 to 5 million.
It's about
we just-
$230,
We
right?
got 230 off of that 1600. And in my opinion, 230 isn't getting us close enough to the 800. Not that I'm saying we should go to 800, of
Right,
course.
right.
I was
Okay,
thinking.
that's
we
what
would
I
keep
would- that's-
it- Yeah, I was sort of, in my head, I was saying 1,000. I was saying, okay, if we're at eight something now, let's say you said, I don't want to go above 1,000. So if I'm hitting 1,600 in 26, I need $600. I need $600. So we've got 230 on the table. The middle school savings adds another 75. So now you're at 300. So your
Didn't
600
you-
becomes 300.
Didn't you just get 233 from the $5 million also? Am I missing something?
Well, I'm leaving debt term off the table, Parashar.
Oh, got
I'm
it.
just saying
Fair
what
enough.
we just talked about was the reserve. You have the middle school savings, which is about 75. So you got $300. And then the question is, you want to do more? And the only thing I see that's obvious on the table is extending the term.
Well, Chris, if you increase the tax burden early, that seems to have a better alignment with the decision to build the school. I mean, people are committed to the school, and so you bring the cost nearer to the decision to build the school. And I think it's somehow it feels more, I don't know what, more aligned with the commitment. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Mhm. Yep.
Yep.
So you're saying raise it above 3, go up to 4 or 5%, and tag that to stabilization and then feed it across.
Right.
Yeah, rather than saying let somebody else pay for it in the future, let's bring it closer to the decision to build the school.
Yeah. It limits
Not
your.
a little bit.
Just so you understand, though, you only have 3 years to do that.
Right. No, I understand.
You're going
Right.
to have a pretty big hit in those years. So that's the thing.
Right. It's not a total solution. It's just
No, your logic makes sense.
an influence.
It does. Yeah, it does. Peggy.
I just want to remind everyone, we're only talking about the capital budget, which is a pretty small part of the overall tax bill.
Right.
So we're kind of digging in and killing ourselves over that. Well, mainly that's my point.
Okay. All right. Greg, we're killing ourselves because it's a big hit.
We're just
though.
digging in and
Big
killing
hit.
ourselves.
Yeah, great. Okay. Greg.
So Christine, if we stay at the 4, looking at the chart, if we stay at the 20-year 4%, right? The high was in 26 at 1,600, and then we leveled out at about 1,200, correct? If we
Yeah,
stayed with
somewhere
the-
around there.
right?
Yep. Yeah, that sounds right.
Right, yeah, if we use the numbers that you were coming up with before, about 300 off of the top, right? That stabilization would then bring us level to what sort of the long term with the capital plans would be, right? Without increasing the
Yeah,
term.
well,
of
you
the
got
30 years.
300, right? So you're at 1,600, so you're at 1,300.
Yeah, and then the longer, all right, so we'd have to go down like another 90 something dollars to get to what, right?
Yep.
We're getting closer toward what
are.
long-term would be in
You
that
are.
point without stretching out the debt to 30 years and that increased penalty of 23.
Well, okay, that's a good question. So are most people opposed to stretching the debt term? Let's take if we just have a show of hands on asking for a vote. I'm just trying to see what the committee sort of feels like. People
Are
who
you stretching it? Are you stretching it to 30 years, to 25 years?
I'll do it, let's say 30 first, okay? So people who like the idea of stretching to 30, can you raise your hand?
Oh, I don't know.
Sorry, people who like it or people who don't mind it?
Amrith,
I
come
don't mind
on,
it.
work with me here.
I don't mind it.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so 5 people are that. What about same question for 25 years? People who would, okay, so I've got, 25 is okay with me
Sure, if
too.
I'm in for 30, I'm
I'm
in
in
for
30, I'm
25.
in 25, right? 1, 2, 3.
Well,
But Converse is the more
I think,
interesting one.
but I think is the conversation really between, are we going to do 20 or are we going to do 30? Because the real significant value that we're talking about is putting a lot of money on the table. That's going to be the 30 year. It's not going to be the 25 year. So we should probably just, take that off the table and let's just talk brass tacks about, do we keep it as is or do we do the 30?
Right.
Well,
I think
no,
that-
if we're talking about shaving the tax bill, we get a shave on the tax bill from going from 20 to 25.
But we don't.
do. It's not that
but
much though.
It's not
Yeah,
that
and
much.
that's only my point, Mary. It's just I
It's like
don't
$70 or
necessarily think it
$80,
has
right?
Yeah,
it
it's
has
about
the
80
impact
bucks
that we
less.
want.
Yeah.
It's
It
what?
does, it's about
$80.
$80 less or so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's still.
Does that change your mind, Mary?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
There's a total tax bill and there's a tax rate, and they're just gonna be different. And I also think the 4% is extremely conservative.
So, and the other question I had, and I appreciated Ray's comment about, we should try to align this more up front and have folks absorb, more of the tax hit up front. But I think maybe, and I don't know what this is, and I would need Carrie some help, some hand holding here, maybe with the advisor. It's the way I'm kind of thinking about this is we do incur that hit up front, but then we actually start off with this 30 year, and then if it's a 10-year call, then we refi to down. I don't know if we can refi back to 20, right? And so what we're and so if that's possible, we're talking about a refinancing as quickly as, to get through these hard lean years, figure out what that actually is, have the advisor come back to us and give us some more information, and then make a determination on how we can use a combination of both, because we're not going to get there. We have to have some combination of this. It's not going to be able, we can't do it separately.
No,
So
it's just, hold on. I just want to pull us back for a second. So, we don't need to solve this, right? So these 15 people sitting here don't need to solve it. What we do need to do, I think, is to make some recommendations of what we think, perhaps in order of priority, should be considered in order to reduce the hit. And I think that's really, we don't need to solve it tonight. We don't need to do all the math, right? It's not up to us to dictate it. But I think we need to make suggestions to the town and to the select board to say, this is what we think you should look at. Okay, so we don't need to go all the way down the rabbit hole to get the answer for this one or that one. So why don't we just come back and let's talk about, we've talked about just about everything except for one more thing I'm going to put on the table. So there's one more item that's really more a question, but it's still out there. And so it's something that could be explored. And so there is ARPA money for the town, and there's also ESSER money for the schools. In my cursory looking at the requirements of how the eligibility for spending under those two plans, it's unclear whether it could be used for this. Yeah, thank you, Carrie, for putting the picture up. The one thing that I was very focused on was whether you could use lost revenue, and I use lost revenue, but I went in and looked at that. It's a pretty complex formula. Obviously, we did lose revenue, but the use of that revenue is for government services which would include education, but don't necessarily include capital spending. So it's unclear to me that we could use this money to offset the building. However, there is discussion about using it for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Perhaps are there other elements that could be considered? It's very new, right? So people, I think, are still looking through it to see what's possible. So it could be that potentially some of that money could be used to bring the cost of the building down. I don't know. Given that it's early days on how ARPA can be used, I don't think it's a bad idea to sort of put that on the list and say, you know, make sure folks look at that to make sure if there's some opportunity, maybe for the, you know, paying for solar. Is there something in there in sustainability? There is language in there that talks about ventilation that can be used to reduce virus spreads. It's a question really of, are there eligible uses in the cost of the middle school that could be offset by this? I don't know. I think it'll take a little time to figure that out, but it's something that could be looked at. So you can take that down, Carrie, but I just wanted to raise that as that's also something that could be out there, but I don't know enough about it, nor do I think the town knows enough about it to say, yes, that's something we can count in terms of making seeing it, the debt come down. I like things that are in front of me that are controllable and I can see the math on. So, but ARPA is a potential. So those are the four potential items. So the question for us is, what ones do we think make sense? Would we like to prioritize for others to say, pursue this as a way to bring the tax impact down? So I will open it for discussion now. And let's stay at that level. Okay, what do you think the priority is of the things that we talked about tonight? Greg.
All right, so I'll get it rolling. Can I make a motion on the priority of the tax assessor to write a note to him, asking him to take a look at the reserves, him or her, I apologize, to take a look at the reserves and come back with a recommendation of if they can release anything.
Okay, so I guess before we do a motion, can we just maybe go around a little bit and see if we can get consensus on the priority? Greg, is that all right? So I like that. So that's definitely an item. And I like what Parashar said earlier, which is we would like to avoid adding 500,000 to the FY23 reserve. And that's something we would ask of the town manager, and that we would ask the Board of Assessors to look to see if it's possible for them to release some of that 2.9 million for purposes of adding to the stabilization reserve. So if people like that idea, I think they do. I'm going to put that on our list. So that's one item on the list, which is the Board of Assessors item. Okay. Another item on the list. Mary.
I'm thinking we could ask for at least 500K from free cash.
Okay.
That's the first thing. And the second thing I'd have would be the override for the stabilization. But before I come up with an amount for that, I'd like to ask Carrie, if the tax rate went up from 2.5 to 3, how much does that give us as far as the amount that we could put in an override stabilization fund? Carrie, is that an easy question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, maybe she can do that in the background while we're still talking.
So those are my two ideas.
So let me just make sure I have that right, Mary, so everybody understands. So we would ask for additional 500K in free cash to go to debt stabilization for FY23.
Right.
And we would also look to take that $350,000 reduction in debt service into the debt, instead of letting it flow through the tax bill. We would actually ask to put that into debt stabilization. Is that correct? Is that what you meant?
No, what 350?
The 350 is the amount that Carrie mentioned on the slide, that if you looked at the existing debt that's coming down, I think.
No, I was asking a different thing. I was saying my second thing was what we've already talked about, which is the possibility of a debt stabilization override, right? The very last.
What's the override for?
Well, I think you have to have a 2/3 vote in order to make that
I think you
happen.
guys are talking about the same thing.
Okay, maybe we are, because
Or
I,
maybe we are.
yeah,
Are we?
if we are, then the amount is 350,000 in the.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Fine.
am I right, Carrie?
So, sorry, I was calculating to make, if we went up to 3%, it's about $620,000
Okay, that's a different thing. Okay,
available. If that's what you're asking, if the property tax,
no, that's what Mary was asking initially. That's good to know.
Yes,
I was actually talking about something else. So Mary,
Okay.
that's not the same thing you were talking about, right? Or is it?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
It's
so
her
the-
first
the
time,
idea-
Mary.
I'm sorry.
I know.
I was, okay, let me
Okay.
back up. Let me slow down.
Okay. The
My first-
idea of going to 3%
Yes,
and creating a stable, that which Carrie has told us would be 620,000. Is
That's
that what
my-
you were talking about?
that's my second
Oh,
idea. Yes.
oh, okay, okay, now
done.
I'm with,
I'm
now
done.
I'm with, okay, now I understand. Okay, so that's another, so there's two more ideas. They are on the list. Parashar.
So I'm gonna try to seek a clarification between the 600,000 and the 375. Bear with me.
Yep.
If we don't go to 3% and we go with the 2.5 or whatever it was that we talked about last week,
Right,
I think that implicitly assumes, Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, because the debt service is declining by $375,000 next year, that we would be taking the 375 in debt service and putting it towards other uses in the operating fund. Is that what was going on last year? Or for last week when we were talking about the 375?
No.
I think I'm following you, and if I am, the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. So Mary, let me
Wait,
try to explain.
that money
Yeah.
just goes
Yeah.
away. You don't reclaim
That's right.
it.
It goes away.
It
We're
goes
not-
away. We don't get it to put it anywhere else. It's gone.
Yes,
No.
Yeah.
yes.
I was not following your question.
Oh, so let me, okay.
okay, all right, Parashar, try again.
Let me try again. If we want to keep that 375,
Right,
what is the tax rate that we have to be at?
so it's 350,000.
350.
And that, if that goes away, it reduces the tax impact by about 0.4%.
So when we presented the numbers last week,
Yeah,
what was the tax rate that you were starting with?
right. So last week, I just want to make sure. So that was 2.6%.
I'm sorry, how much?
2.46%.
Okay,
That's what your guideline was.
okay,
That's just within the levy.
yep,
The exempt debt is going down by 353,000. So that's down by 0.38%. So the effective rate is 2.08%.
okay. So what would that rate look like if we wanted to keep it at 350, keep the 350?
So then we would be back to
1.8.
2.46 overall.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds as if we stick with 2.46, we'd get the 350.
Yep.
And then if we go to 3, you'd get another 600,000. Is that what's going on?
not another.
Yes,
Yes.
is it another, are they additive, Carrie, or is the 620 include the 350?
So the 620 was to go from 2.46 to 3%.
There you
Okay,
go.
so they
That's
are
what I wanted to
additive, they are
clarify.
additive.
So that's what
that
I
would
wanted to
be-
clarify.
So that's good, so that would be 1 million or thereabouts.
Exactly, thank
Yeah.
you. So
Yeah.
what I would favor, I'm not sure I favor going to 3, but I would favor
I
keeping
know,
the
I know.
350 is my point, is what I wanted to say.
Yeah,
Number one. And then number two, I like the idea of the 500,000. That's what I was suggesting before. I would make it 1 million, but that's 500 is fine. And then
From where,
the additional
Prashad?
thing,
Right.
sorry?
From
free cash.
Okay, just clarifying. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I would make it 1 million from free
Okay.
cash, but I'm fine with 500.
Okay,
And then I would actually prioritize the refinancing to go to 30 years on top of that.
okay. All right,
Thank you for
Good.
bearing with me.
good. No, D,
Yeah, the question that I have, when you were talking about the ARPA money and
Yeah.
you were looking at it in how the school could use it for the new middle school.
yes, yes.
Why not look at it in terms of, if that money is there and infrastructure, the bottom one was one of the things listed. Why don't we start looking at, or trying to find out from the town manager, how could the ARPA funds be used that would now be used for infrastructure so that it would then reduce the capital that he would need, which then that money could go into from his budget. He wouldn't need as much money in his capital, his item one, or whatever you want to call it, tier one fund, and that money could go into our free cash that then goes into
Yeah.
the stabilization fund.
Yeah, I don't think it can work that way, but I understand
Why?
exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because ARPA doesn't allow you to create financial reserves directly or indirectly. However, but it can be used for infrastructure. So it's a fair question, D. So I think we should put that on the list. I think,
Yeah.
I think it's all evolving. So I can't, I'm no expert on it, and I don't think anybody is an expert yet, but I think it's a good question to see if in fact we could get an indirect benefit that way. I don't think you can, but it's a good question. So I think we should put it on a list.
Okay, good.
Good. Amrith.
So just a clarification, maybe. The specific things which everyone's recommending is where to get specific, where do we get money from this account or the other account? Maybe what I'm going to propose is not what you're looking for. So let me try. If you were to go to a 30-year bond at the target interest rate, and you were to just sum up what you're going to have to pay over the next 10 years and average it out, it comes to about $1,250 per year. On the bottom line of this placeholder amount, in other words, over 10 years, you'd have to pay $12,500. Can we make a recommendation to whoever to say, the difference between 12,500 and that number which you have there, consider raising that in 23, 24, and so on, towards whatever you're going to need in the years where there's a peak, and set the 1250 as the target we expect to spend on large capital projects moving forward. Because the thing I'm scared about is, today we know of these projects, tomorrow there's going to be another large capital project which is not on this list.
Yep.
And then what are you going to do? And where's the money for that going to, rather than having this conversation each time we have one of these projects, because there is going to be one more, there may be another whatever building, maybe not $100 million worth, but
Yep.
Can we establish a guideline which says, we now have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 projects. We're going to anticipate that the expense which these projects in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 are going to be on a per year on a tax bill are going to be $1,250 something and something. And then you go carve it up any which way you want. If you don't have the money for that, then we have the conversation. Otherwise, we have it set aside in a stabilization fund somewhere already.
Yep,
So I
think
can make the
that's-
stabilization fund for the salt shed right now.
You could. Well, again, you're going to have to raise taxes to get there somehow, but yes, you could. I don't think that's a bad idea. I think that's an interesting way to come at it. Parashar.
You're on mute.
So I was just gonna say, what I know about the ARPA funding, and maybe the first thing to check is the timing of this.
Yeah,
So even on the infrastructure spend,
yeah.
if the
It
spend's not gonna
needs
occur
to
till
be
26,
obligated by the end of 24.
Yeah, and if our spending and building isn't gonna start till 26,
Well, the spending's going to start before then. The building's going to go in line then. So it's a fair point, though. It's not going to
Yeah.
be easy to do.
so that,
So
for
again,
my,
that's-
my opinion, that would be gravy rather than
Yes.
even
Yes.
counting on any of it,
Yeah.
frankly.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am after looking at it. But again, others smarter than me who know more about it should look at it. Dean.
not yet spoken about is the infrastructure bill that has yet to even pass. Is there
Yeah.
anything in that that will help fund new schools?
I
mean,
don't know.
One presumes that if
Okay,
that's,
but right. Okay, hold. All right, we're going to go to a hearing on December 16th, right? So in 6 weeks, we're going to have a hearing with the public. The school committee is going to have to get up and talk about this debt, what it's going to cost. And I think they're probably, if I were them, I would like some sort of a explanation of how it's going to be absorbed by taxpayers. So I think that's a good idea to put on the list, but I don't think it's practical for us to draw it in now, because now is when we're going to go to the voters. So
right,
we don't know what it is. So I can't put that on the list yet. I
Yep.
don't.
okay, fair
Okay.
enough.
Good. Mary.
I just want to make a comment to Amrith. Amrith, and I thought you brought up a really good thing. We don't want to be doing this every time a project pops up and they pop up.
Yep.
But what we're doing right now is because we have an incredibly large project in front of us. So I think it's worthwhile to go through the shaving exercise for now. And I don't think we're going to have, I think we're putting in some ideas in place that we won't have to do it every time. Well, that's all. This is just an out of scale project that requires a different approach.
It is. And the timing of it is just not great, right? So if you know, it is what it is, but this is why this process that we're going through tonight is a good process, right? To be able to look at what happens to debt and capacity when you load projects in. So it's a good thing to do it.
So Christine, may I respond to that
before.
maybe with a question?
Yeah.
So maybe the reason which I was thinking of having a limit is because we have this one project. And that project is not just what it is doing, but what it is taking away from other projects. Let's assume that this middle school wasn't there and everything else was life as usual. The project which is going to add $111 to your tax bill, no problem.
Right.
It's because of this $1,000 on your tax bill that the additional ones are harder. Therefore, in the future, even if there is a small project, you may have exactly the same conversation because you've already bitten off the $1,000 project. That's the reason why I'd like to have this in place, because the future small projects are going to have this conversation again.
I mean, again, we're going to send a list of recommendations, right, Mary? So I think that's not a bad, that's another way to look at it, right? To say, do you want to cap the amount of the tax bill that's tied to excluded debt? And do you want to cap it somewhere 1,000, 1,200? It's another way to look at it. So, so, okay. I think that's a pretty good list, you guys. So let's talk about, let me put them in order. Let me read them out. And then let's see if I'm going to try and put them in some sort of priority based on what I think the impact is. And then we'll see if we can come up with a recommendation. All right. So the items that we have are the Board of Assessors review. So that includes 2 items, the look at the reserve as well as the 500,000. We have the one idea, which is the increasing the debt term to 30 years, which is impactful. We also have the 500,000 for free cash from this year or potentially future years to help build up debt stabilization. In addition to increasing the taxes now in 23, 24, and 25 to also build up the stabilization. So I guess we have kind of.
Can you break those apart?
Yeah.
Can you break those into two different ones?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So, okay. All right. So if you think about it, the types, we have stabilization, and we have a couple different ways to get there. So we have the Board of Assessors item. We have free cash. And then we have the tax rate. So we have 3 ideas to create stabilization. Those are the 3 ideas we have. And then separately, we have debt term. And then thirdly, we have ARPA. Those are the three categories that we have. So of the 3, ARPA, debt, stabilization, and stabilization has 3 subsets. Which do you think comes first?
Chris, I just want to suggest a slight amendment to the term. I think one of the things we talked about that was appealing, and maybe this would be standard practice anyway, is that the debt be callable after a period. The expectation is that it could be called after what we're advised is an appropriate period for this kind of debt, which is probably 10 years.
Right.
But that gives us an opportunity in the medium term to address the increased the increased interest expense.
Yep, good. So we would say our debt item is both term and call options.
Right, exactly.
Perfect. Okay. So I say stabilization is our #1 priority. So I'm going to put that out there. Raise your hand if you like that idea. Raise your hand if you like stabilization first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so 10 people like that. What if who likes debt term and call options first? 1, 2. Okay. 2. I got 2 for that. And then who likes ARPA first? Anybody? No. Okay.
Isn't ARPA just a given to ask, right? I mean,
It's an ask, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So if we go, so if stabilization is first, which it looks like that's the consensus of the committee, that we would want to go stabilization first. And I'm not sure you can do it without debt, but in any event, stabilization first. So within that, we have the Board of Assessors going to them. Can you release some of the reserve? Can we avoid going to the town manager, say, let's not build up another 500,000 in that reserve? Or add 500,000 out of free cash, or move the tax rate from, let's say, 2.5 to 3. So those 3 options within there. Do you have any strong sense of which of those you prefer? I'll read them out. So the Board of Assessors reserve, people like that first. I kind of like that first.
Wouldn't that drive our decision on the other two as well?
It would be helpful. It's a little bit found money, right? So 1, 2,
Sorry, what are the 3? Board of Assessors is 1. What were the other 2?
free cash. Asking for free cash for $500,000 or so.
Can we talk for a minute about how much, because I said 5 and Parashar said $1 million. So can we take a minute and just see how much, I mean, I'm okay with going up to $1 million, actually.
Can I ask one other question?
I don't think we even have to decide it, frankly.
No, just ask for, really?
Ask
Okay.
for free cash, right? We don't need to be this predictive, guys. So can we, so it's just go to the Board of Assessors to ask, Brian.
Chris, one question. So is this really an or is this actually an and? Because I feel like this is an and situation.
Yeah.
This is not an or situation.
Okay, that's good to know.
If it's an and situation, the numbers don't really matter at this point.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Okay.
Chris, is it helpful to frame it in terms of stating the ultimate goal, that what we're trying to do is establish a stabilization fund within a certain range?
Yep.
And these are the components we're looking at to piece together that full amount.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I'd say so. So I think you need to be, as I said, I think it's if you want $1.6 million a year for those 3 years, you're at the $5 million level. So Kerry had said 4. So I'm happy if we want to say 4 to 5 million. My preference is higher, but 4 to 5 million is okay with me if people want to put a range on how large a stabilization reserve you'd like.
Sounds good.
Does that sound good to people? 4 to 5 million?
Put a stake in the ground.
Where do we go on the free cash?
We're not going to set a number. We're not going to set a number. We're going to say there's 3 sources for it, right? So we're just going to say, go to free cash if you've got it, right? We're not going to argue about the 500 or $1 million. There's going to be
Won't they be asking for us though? Won't the select board eventually ask? In the past, the finance committee has always given them a number that we recommend. So at some point.
For use of free cash?
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe they'll ask.
But here's the thinking though, right? We should ask the Board of Assessors by a date certain how much they can give us. That should be the first.
I'm not going to ask the Board of Assessors. So this is a recommendation going to the select board, right? They can decide if what they want to do, right? So this is
fair enough, but I guess things should be sequenced a bit, whether it's also the select board. But from my perspective, you grab the money from that overlay account or whatever it's called first. Say they can give us 700,000.
Yep.
Then to the point of 5 million divided by 3 years, or 5 million, whatever, you can then say this year, we've got 500,000 or 700,000 to give, and maybe you've made up this year's number. Do you see what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point. So if we said we're looking for, we think we have 2 million in stabilization reserve now. We think you need 4 to 5 million.
Yep.
And that could mean $1 million a year, 23, 24, 25. We think these are the places you can get
Good,
it from.
good.
And I think that works, right? So get $1
Yes.
million a year and get up there.
Yep.
And you can look for these sources for it. And then that gives them, the options to go get it.
I would add
Good.
one other tweak. If you can
Yeah.
feel like you can make a little bit more this year, it might save you from trouble next year, right? So maybe it's 1.2 this year.
Yeah.
So that's the caveat I would add.
Yeah, do it as soon as you can.
Yes.
Exactly.
That was Ray's
Okay,
point.
that's
Yeah.
good. That's good. I like that. Okay, I
Good.
like that. Let me see here. Okay, so we're going to say stabilizations first. Here's your ideas on that. Debt is second. And there we're interested in extending the term, but also looking at whether call options would help you because you have a 3-year problem in 25, 26, 27. How do you want to go at it? And lastly, gravy, go look at ARPA and see if you can get some funds there to bring the cost down of the building.
The only question I have, all that sounds fine, Chris, but the only question I have around that is the debt doesn't strike me as being an or either. If we're going to do the stabilization fund, we're probably going to need to do the debt as well. It's a combination of those things. So I just want to make sure that we don't make the distinction here that this is sort of you do 1, 2, or 3 because it could confuse the situation.
Yeah. Okay, we can start. What I would do is I would say, look, the goal here, similar to what Amrith was saying, is like we're trying to bring the number down. We think maybe it should be 1,000, 1,100, 1,200. There's maybe 1,000 to 1,200 is where we think you should probably end up. How you get there, these are the options we think that are on the table that are real. You've got to increase the stabilization reserve and you've got to deal with debt term. Those are probably your 2 options. And if ARPA comes through, that's great, but you're not going to know that for a while. Okay.
It's not in our bailiwick, but if we have a good call option in there and we find out some way to monetize Peabody, we could really do some damage to this thing.
Yeah, if that, and again, that's great. And in the future, if you could, right? But it's again, that's not a bird in the hand, but I agree.
Exactly.
And that's on the list.
If you have a call option, you have some headroom to work with that.
Exactly.
Yes,
that's an excellent point because the challenge with that the value that's buried in Peabody is a timing issue, among other things. But when your problem is a timing issue, you can't realize it in time to use it.
Yeah. That's a good
but
point.
the call option gives you a second bite.
Right, it does. Good point. Good point. Okay.
Can I make a motion?
Yes, please.
I make a motion that we authorize Christine Reynolds to write a letter on behalf of the Finance Committee to the Select Board outlining what we just discussed.
Second.
Hang on.
Do you have a question, Brian, or you?
Sorry, I think Greg is right in terms of you have to rescind your motion.
You have to rescind mine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Greg, will you please rescind your motion?
I rescind my motion.
Okay.
Yeah, Reynolds rules. The chair
That's
can't motion.
Right. All right, Mary.
All right, Mary.
All right,
take
Mary,
it away.
Take
I
it
have
away.
to do it again. Okay, I make a motion that the Finance Committee authorize Christine Reynolds on behalf of the Finance Committee to write a letter to the Select Board outlining our recommendations to alleviate the debt expense from the middle school.
Second.
Okay. All right, then I will take a vote. Chris Reynolds, I vote yes. Greg Gariello,
Yes.
Ray Andrews,
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg,
Yes.
Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Amrith Kumar,
Yes.
Ryan Taylor,
Yes.
Parashar Patel. You're on mute.
Yes, and I'm assuming it gets copied to the school committee, right?
Yeah, it can be. It's no problem with it. It's really a letter to the Select Board. We can copy whoever we'd like on it, I'm sure. If that's what you prefer, we can do that. Although none of the direction in here is to them, right? So it's really a Select Board
We're
discussion.
all in this together.
Yep, that's fine. Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Lois Wassoff,
Yes.
Kathy Kukalo,
Yes.
Peggy Briggs.
Yes.
Okay, I think I've asked everybody. Is that correct? Oh, Dee, did I not get you? I
Oh,
apologize.
you got me before. I have a comment.
Oh, please.
And I would like to thank you, and I'd like to thank, I think the whole committee would like to thank you and Carrie for the presentations that you made and all the time and effort you've put into guiding us through this
Sure.
evening.
Thank you. Okay.
It was fun.
So, all right, so we have a unanimous vote on that. I will work on the letter. So we also have public comment this evening. So I don't know if we have any folks from the public who would like to comment on what we discussed this evening or the long-term capital plan that's in front of the community, but let's give a second to see if anyone does.
We've got one resident, Joel Gagne.
Yes, please
Okay.
promote Joel.
Mr. Gagne, you're on the panel. Could you just say your name and address?
Sure. Joel Gagne, 31 Central Street.
Okay.
Great. First of all, I just want to thank you for all of your work. I know that there's lots of hours that go into this, and I just want to thank you. I am co-chair of a group called Concord Community for Great Schools, and we view our job here is to make sure that the middle school project comes to fruition. And, you know, I just want to be able to sit there and say that the building committee that has put forward this project has done an absolutely phenomenal job. And because of the phenomenal job that they've done, we are very proud to sit there and get together a coalition to make sure that this is approved at town meeting and at the ballot. I also just want to say that no one got what they wanted in this, according to my research. This is not a Taj Mahal. School buildings are expensive to build in this line of work, and I'm here to tell you they're just not that cheap. So I know that this has been capped at $100 million, and my request to this committee is just very simple. That number was set in 2019. Obviously, the world's been turned upside down, and I really do hope that, you know, that number is not considered something hard and fast. We believe that this project this is the building that the community wants. Not everyone was happy with it, but it is something that dirty word compromise was actually happening at the building committee. This is the building that the community wants. And because of that, we believe that the community now deserves the right to vote on this up or down. And there should not be any type of hard cap if this number goes over 100 million, which it might not, we don't know. But if it does, we are looking to the finance committee, the selectmen, the school committee, and the building committee to let the people have their say whether or not they will support this project, if they're willing to raise their taxes. This has been a very open process. The community's had their say on what building they want. Now they should deserve to have their say on whether or not they want to fund it. I want to encourage this committee not to make mistakes that have been done in the past in this community when it's come to some of these buildings, of some short-sighted thinking instead of the long-term usage of these buildings and what it costs. And I know you guys have done a great job. And I just want to, again, thank you that, you know, for all the work that you've done. And we just want to say that we're really, really grateful. And I hope that you'll take that into consideration as this project continues to move forward. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Joel. Are there any other comments, Chris? Are there any other public comments for us?
No, we've just got Matt Johnson and Cynthia Rainey, and they're not raising their hands.
Okay. Either Matt or Cynthia, if you have any comments on our deliberations, now's a good time to come up if you've got anything. Otherwise, we'll probably adjourn.
Matt's raising his hand.
Got his hand up.
Great. Matt, please bring him up.
I just wanted to say that on the debt term, I'm really of two minds here, and I'm just speaking as a citizen. I am a member of the select board, but not able to speak for the board. yet. So if you look at that plan, the only reason that it's not an even bigger hit to our taxes is because of our past policies in funding other projects of having a more accelerated retirement of debt. And, we just need to be aware that if we do this, extend the term to 30 years, we're tying the hands of whoever's in the future, and they're going to have an even bigger problem if a big project comes forward, with the same sorts of issues we've struggled with tonight. And so that's one half of my feeling. And I just feel like our predecessors in their prudence have made our job actually easier. And we don't want to be the ones making our successors' jobs harder. But then the other thing on my mind is just looking at the potential for inflation increasing, and that if we lock in long-term debt now, it might be considered the deal of the century. And that we probably want to borrow as much as we can for as long as we can. So, I don't want to just let policy get in the way of good timing. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then I've separately offline, I'm pursuing the question of the salt shed, because I've been poking around and I'm having a hard time finding a salt shed that costs more than $2 million. So if you all know of one, I did find one in Manhattan. It was 20 million, but it's a it's a 10-story sculpture. It's really remarkable, and it services all of Manhattan.
Right. Good. Well, thank you for your comments, Matt. We appreciate them.
Okay.
And I'm sure, as I said, we'll be sending a letter and ask for the select board's consideration of some of the ideas that we have.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hey,
Okay.
Chris, can I ask a question? I know Joel Gagnon was on a minute ago. He's still on. Did he identify his address? Or did I miss that?
I think he did.
Yes,
Yes,
he
he
did.
did
He
at the
did.
beginning. He did.
He
Yeah, we're
did.
good
I
on
don't
that.
remember what it was, but he did.
Center Street.
Okay, good. All right, I will take a motion to adjourn.
We've
Motion
got one
to
more.
adjourn.
Wait, Cynthia
wait.
Rainey has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Great. Cynthia, please come up.
She is joining the panel.
Thank you.
Miss Rainey, if you could just say your name and address.
You're muted.
It takes a second, I think, to come up.
No, but she's still muted.
seems
She
to have
has
joined.
herself muted.
Thank you.
Hi, Cynthia.
So Cynthia Rainey, 80 Hunters Ridge Road. I want to thank you for the conversation. And I just want to request if there's any way we can get this video posted tomorrow, because I would like to encourage the other members of the school committee to watch it who might not have been able to attend tonight, to help us with our conversations next Tuesday. So, because I think there's a lot of good ideas and information that would benefit us all. And we will be getting the estimates tomorrow at the building committee meeting to help us inform further conversation on the number. But I think you guys did a great job tonight, because this is all very complicated. And having been on the Board of Assessors, I'll tell you that I'm sure the board will work with the town assessor and deliberate on this and come back with a great idea, but it's complicated. And as Carrie knows. So 101 on an assessment in Concord would be a good 8-hour meeting, I'm sure.
Right, I'm sure.
Hey, Cynthia, during tomorrow's meeting, are we going to make this like the Academy Awards, where an envelope is handed to somebody and they open it up live for the cost estimate?
Somebody's gonna come in with a suitcase, exactly.
Right.
So, but it's a big project, and this isn't there's still a lot of work to be done even after we get through the schematic design, as you all know. So we have to go to DD and CD, and and the bids have to go out. So there's a long road to go, but it's a good road. So.
Hey, Parashar, I just want to let you know that there was a year that they got it wrong. So I don't know if you remember that. So let's not jinx, please let's not jinx this.
And what happened?
Right.
Well, I remember that the
It was
CEO
PwC. It was my old firm.
Didn't they
I think
actually
what was-
resign?
I think it was
Didn't
PwC.
heads
Oh,
roll?
it was
Yeah, heads
bad.
rolled. Oh,
It was
yeah.
bad.
Oh, right.
So
That
I
was
would hate
bad.
for there to be a number that would
Yeah,
not
we
be the
won't jinx
number.
We won't jinx it. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for hanging out for a long meeting. We appreciate it.
Have a
And,
great night.
yeah, we'll look forward to future discussions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Second? Okay, we're going to do a roll call vote. Greg Gariello,
Yes.
Chris Reynolds, yes. Ray Andrews,
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg,
Yes.
Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Amrith Kumar,
Yes.
Ryan Taylor,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Parashar Patel,
yes.
Kathy Kukalo,
Yes.
Lois Wassoff,
Yes.
Peggy Briggs.
Yes.
All right. I think we got them all. Thank you so much for all your hard work and hanging in there. And we'll
Thank
see you, I
you.
think, oh, you're welcome. We'll see you. I think it's 2 weeks is our next meeting. I think is that right?